Yes, I can.
Great,
Hi,
thanks.
Tom.
Folks, if you can hear me, would you please grab your favorite beverage and make yourself comfortable? We're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 7th session and our Woodland Conferences webinar mini-series of 2021. My name is Don Cameron, and I'm a Regional Forester with the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. It is my pleasure to be your MC this evening. In the spirit of meaningful reconciliation, we acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people in what is known today as Nova Scotia, a small part of Mi'kma'ki. The Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1725 and subsequent treaties remain foundational to the relationship between the Mi'kmaq people and all Canadians. We are all treaty people. Since our last live webinar, which was way back in April 21st, although the time has flown, much has happened. For example, our department, as you might recall, Lands and Forestry, has grown and changed names. Now we're Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. Back in the spring, we hoped that by this time COVID-19 would be at least under control and life would be returning to near normal. Unfortunately, we're not quite there yet, as the announcement of 26 new COVID cases today indicates, but we are making progress. Now, before we get started, I just want to mention, yesterday I had the pleasure of hosting a busload of elementary school kids on my woodlot, and to see the excitement and see what they were learning and see how much they were enjoying themselves. I just want to encourage everybody, if you get an opportunity to get youth out to the woods, it's so worth it. It's worth it to you alone, but for them, it's priceless. A lot of these kids don't get the opportunity. So if you get a chance through your friends, family, neighbors, schools, local elementary school, or like our friend Pat O'Toole, get the Cubs and Girl Guides out there. It's well worth it for everybody. So just want to put a little plug in there. So this conference mini-series is a variation of our annual Spring Woodland Conference series, which we've been organizing across the province annually for many years now. Despite the pandemic, we're pleased to be able to continue to offer interesting and educational presentations this fall in this online format. Hopefully it will be safe to meet again in person for the 2022 spring conferences, for which we are now beginning to plan. In the meantime, we hope you're staying safe and healthy during these challenging COVID times. Now, a little bit about the WebEx setup here with the AV system. You as participants are automatically muted and your video is turned off for the benefit of the presentations. Your names are invisible to each other, but are visible to us, the event organizers. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions later. There's a Q&A panel on the upper right side of your screen where you can post your questions. Just click on the arrow beside the Q&A. You will be able to forward your questions to us. I will read your questions out to the presenter to answer verbally. And of course, depending on the number of questions, we may not get to all of them during the time allotted, but our goal is to send out answers after the session today to any answers that are not answered tonight. Polling questions. Any polling questions for you will appear on the right of the screen below the Q&A section. The polling question tool provides an opportunity for immediate responses from you, the participants. Please note that in case you would like to get back and review some part of this event at a later time, or if you know of someone interested who's unable to be with us tonight, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online at nswoods, that's nswoods.ca, for future viewing. The previous spring webinar sessions that were recorded to date include Forest Sector and Forestry Transition Team Update, Private Land Stewardship, Invasive Species and Forest Pests, and Climate Change and Forest Carbon. And most recently, Biodiversity, Wildlife, and Species at Risk, as well as Forestry, Business Planning, and Potential. So there's lots there for you to tune into. The link for these recorded sessions is also available on the nswoods.ca website. And I should add, thus far, there have been more than 400 viewings of these recorded sessions, which is pretty impressive and encouraging. So for today's session, we have more than 100 individuals registered to participate from all over, including out of province and out of country. A note, today's speaker bio and any speaker handouts will be available also through the nswoods.ca website. And the format, for those of you that are new to us. Our presenter will respond to questions after the completion of his presentation, and the event today will run approximately till 8 p.m. We're happy to be able to offer this special COVID version of the Woodland Conference series. For those of you who are regulars at our annual conferences, you may recall that we create agendas for each conference based on feedback we receive from you, the participants. So, again, we ask you to please provide feedback to us at the end of today's session, as you'll have the opportunity to do so. And also, if you are a regular, you'll know that we are famous for providing good door prizes. We make it worth your while in a couple ways. Tonight is no exception. One of you participants will win by random draw at our next webinar, which is November 24th, a new retractable handsaw of value $50 or more. The name of the lucky winner will be drawn from names on the registration list from each session. Okay, time for the presentation. Over the years of conferences, it has been obvious to us that woodland owners of all levels of experience are interested in today's topic, which is woodland stewardship planning, pathways to success. Our presenter, Dave Sutherland, is well known to many of you. Dave is the Executive Director of the Association for Sustainable Forestry, which provides valuable forest management funding and information for woodland owners. Dave is also the former manager of the Nova Forest Alliance, as well as forester and manager of the North Colchester Forest Cooperative. We have certainly called upon Dave as a presenter many times over the years because he's both a great presenter and full of useful information. Dave, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to have so many on the webinar tonight. Now I just have to share my screen, I think. All right, I hope everyone can see that. So as Dawn indicated, I'm here tonight to talk about stewardship planning, and it's been my privilege working as a forester over the years to have personally prepared 150 or more stewardship plans or management plans. Some folks call them management plans. So I'll use that term interchangeably, stewardship and management. In addition, you'll notice that I also use the term woodland in this presentation, but to many of you folks, woodlot and woodland are basically the same thing. And so we'll treat those two terms the same way tonight. So I'll just move on here to my first slide, if I can get it to work. So folks, it's been obvious to me over the years, not only in my own woodland management, but in helping others with their woodland management as well, that planning is absolutely vital, and it's certainly the most effective tool when it comes to effective woodlot management. And here we see our good friend Peter Spicer up in Cumberland County, who is very involved in managing his woodland, and Peter's known to some of you. Certainly, he's been a voice in the forest industry over the years, and so if he's listening tonight, we'll say hello to Peter. So it's obvious then, if you want to successfully reach your goals and objectives, you need some kind of plan, and it has to be effective. It has to be reasonable. And the difference between goals and objectives, I guess, in the context of this discussion is that the goals are the things that landowners strive to reach, and the objectives are basically the ways that they implement their activities in order to reach the goals. So, in the first case, having a very good plan, it allows you to anticipate and avoid problems. And we know that in the world of woodland management, all kinds of problems can arise unexpectedly and unanticipated. So having a plan in place, some kind of stewardship plan, allows you to avoid those issues and perhaps see down the road ahead what issues might be arising. In addition to avoiding problems, a plan will also help you save money. If there are ways that um, a person could better implement forest management activities, that will obviously save you some money. And having a good plan, even on paper, can go a long ways towards making sure that you don't needlessly waste funds on managing your woodland. It also will ensure quality work, whereby once you know what activities are anticipated for your property, you can go about getting the best person to undertake those activities if you're not doing them yourself. So quality control is another avenue which having an effective stewardship plan will address. It will also demonstrate due diligence, and in the picture here I show just some trees close to a water body, and we all know that wherever water and forest land come together, there's a potential for issues, especially if you're going to be constructing watercourse crossings. So having this plan in place, certainly planning your watercourse crossings in advance and working anywhere near sensitive areas or wetlands. If you have that information in your plan, then you can avoid those problems and demonstrate due diligence, which may go a long ways towards solving or resolving those problems down the road. And finally, having a plan really indicates that you're showing a commitment to woodland stewardship. And that goes a long ways towards demonstrating to others, in particular your neighbors or to others involved in forest woodland activities, that your stewardship activities are for real and that you are serious about undertaking them. So right away, we're going to jump into a polling question, and it should be a yes or no answer. Do you have a stewardship or management plan for your woodland? And there are three possible answers here. Yes, you have a plan. No, you don't have one. Or C, you may be not sure, or perhaps there may have been one on your property in years gone by, but you're not sure if it's still in place. So I'll give you just a short time to answer that question. So if you don't have a stewardship plan in place, or you have one that's very outdated, where do you actually begin to get started on either drawing up a new stewardship plan or perhaps starting from scratch and um, you know rebuffing an old reworking an old management plan that really needs to be updated? So one place that a lot of landowners begin is Property Online, and that's on Government of Nova Scotia website. And Property Online is a good indicator of where your property is situated on the landscape, where it is in relation to other properties. And Property Online can be a fair source of information. Certainly, if you know your property identification number or PID, that will help things, help you in locating your lot on the maps that Property Online provides. In addition to that, it also provides just an estimate of the area or the acreage of the property in question. And sometimes, well, we found in the past that sometimes you have to take those acreages with a bit of a grain of salt in some instances where they're not entirely accurate, but they are just an estimate, and there is a disclaimer on the Property Online site to indicate that. So Property Online is a great place to begin. Another place that many landowners go to have an overview of where their property is on the landscape is to Google Earth. And most folks are familiar with Google Earth. It's kind of fun to zoom around the world and find where you want to travel and where you'd like to go and maybe see in advance what it's like. But it's also a good way of getting a bird's eye view of your woodland. And you can zoom into a certain resolution on Google Earth. The version that's most available to the public is not necessarily the highest resolution, but you can zoom in to a degree. Some of the professional versions of Google Earth have higher resolutions, but in general, Google Earth is a good way of getting started. And if you can zoom in, perhaps you can notice different features of your woodlot. In this case, here's where a commercial thinning has been undertaken, perhaps in a plantation, and that stands right out on Google Earth, and it's kind of neat to see that, especially if it's on your property. And you can see a pretty good distinction of the boundary lines as well, and it will give you the approximate location of those boundary lines. So Google Earth is a great resource for most landowners. Something that you might want to do, and most landowners find valuable, is to talk with as many other woodlot owners as possible, particularly those folks that may have an adjoining woodland to your property, and speak with them and find out what their objectives are, what their goals are. And you never know, you can pick up all kinds of interesting information about how to do things, and perhaps the best time of year to do things if you're not entirely familiar with your woodlot. And one great place to pick up this kind of information is at the Woodlot Owner of the Year events. Those are always terrific opportunities to meet other woodland owners and give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as you want and speak with landowners that are kind of like-minded and enjoy speaking about their own woodland with you. It's really important that if you're going to be preparing any part of your own plan, or even to come up with some goals for your property, that it's important to get to know your woodland. And that means, of course, walking as much of your woodland as possible, preferably with a companion and somebody that knows a little bit about navigation. And it's great to be able to walk through the woods with someone who can explain things to you, or have as many questions as you do about where you're going and what you're looking at. So getting to know your woodland is really quite important. And every feature of your woodland has got something distinctive to offer. And I would urge all of you to become as familiar as you can with every corner of your woodlot, with every feature, with every habitat feature on your lot. If you enjoy looking at wildlife, if you enjoy other aspects of just walking through your woodland, it's great to be able to take in as much detail as possible. And folks, you can never have too much information about your woodland. Every time you walk in your woodland, it should be just an information gathering session, and you can never really gain enough information about your lot. And in the past, many landowners have found that it's great to get to know a forest professional, someone who has had a formal forestry education and is able to perhaps go with you on your woodland, walking your property and explaining different features and what you're seeing and possible treatments that could be done to help you with your management goals. So getting to know a forest professional is a good way of doing this. So some tools of the trade when you're thinking about stewardship planning. These are some tools of the trade which forest professionals use. Of course, there's the GPS unit, which is important for navigation and measuring areas. An aerial photo of some kind, which in many cases could be just a printout of a Google Earth image, or it could be 1 to 12,500 scale property aerial photo. Also, diameter tape is something that forest professionals use, of course, to measure the diameter of trees. And that helps with determining whether certain trees qualify for different silviculture treatments like crop tree release or crop tree pruning, some of these other treatments which could be done. Also, there is a some folks call it a clinometer, and that's used to measure the height of trees, and you can get a fairly accurate reading of tree height. And of course, even if you have a GPS unit, it's always good to have, and I'm talking from previous experience, it's always great to have a compass in your back pocket in case the batteries in your GPS unit die or something happens to your GPS unit. It's great to have a compass nearby so that you can just carry on. One tool that has come to the forefront of many applications in forest management just in the last few years has been the soil auger. And certainly many of you will be familiar with the term forest ecosystem classification. And a soil auger is now something that forest professionals carry with them when they're walking in the woods so that they can take soil samples, just beneath the forest floor or even deeper to try and determine what kind of soil they're looking at, the type of soil. Also, you can determine with the sample, you can determine the soil texture. And here's an example of a sample that can be brought up with a soil auger. So it's quite a sizable chunk of soil, and by rubbing the soil between your thumb and forefinger and moistening it, forest professionals can often determine the texture of the soil, whether it's a fine soil or coarse soil. In other words, how much clay, relatively speaking, is in the soil compared to sand. And these can really help with future management decisions. In addition, the soil auger can tell you, it'll give you a rough estimate of the soil moisture at different depths, the soil drainage conditions, and all those things together can give you great insight into the site conditions of the forest stand that you're in. So a soil auger is used by forest professionals quite a bit these days. Another tool that has come to the forefront recently is LiDAR imagery, and LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. And now that LiDAR images are available to the public on different sites on the internet, folks can bring up LiDAR images and use them in determining future pathways for their stewardship plans. So the top image looks more like an aerial photograph, but it's really an aerial photo that's been enhanced a little bit with LiDAR. And LiDAR is basically laser beams that are shot from an aircraft that penetrate the canopy of forest cover and reach ground level in a lot of cases, if the forest canopy is not too thick. So the image on the top, which resembles an aerial photo, and the image on the bottom is a LiDAR image, and these are basically the same area. And you can see on the bottom photo just how the LiDAR imagery through the light detection and ranging is able to sort of strip off the entire forest canopy and vegetation, and even a lot of the infrastructure, roads and so on, that might be in place. And it gives you a kind of a bare ground image of the landscape. And you can just imagine how useful this information is to planners that may be building woodland roads or planning other kinds of construction on the landscape. These LiDAR images really are a valuable tool, and forest professionals use those on a regular basis. And I can't emphasize just how much that these LiDAR images are valuable to the forest profession. So let's move on then to what the actual contents of a woodland stewardship plan could be or should be. So obviously, number one on the list are landowner goals and objectives. And as I said earlier, objectives really are the means to reach the goals. So overarching goals of a landowner, of course, vary greatly from one landowner to the other. And we'll look at landowner goals in a little bit more depth shortly. Secondly, certainly a map of the woodland is central to the whole plan, and a good accurate map goes a long way towards implementing your plan in the long run. Thirdly, some kind of description of the boundary lines of the property. We've all heard the term that good fences make good neighbors. Well, in the forestry world, good boundary lines make good neighbors as well. So having a good description of the condition of the boundary lines of your property helps greatly in maintaining not only good relations with your neighbors, but also accurately identifying where your woodlot is on the ground, where stands stop and begin, and very useful to know what the condition of your lines are. Also, a woodland stewardship plan should continue or should contain a description of each forest stand. And here I'll use the terms forest stand and ecosite interchangeably. Since the forest ecosystem classification came along about 10 years ago, we've been talking more and more about ecosystems and ecosites. So whenever you hear me talk about a stand, it's roughly equivalent to what an ecosite is. As well, any stewardship plan should contain some details of wildlife habitat that may be apparent on the ground. It could be a nest, it could be a beaver dam, could be any other habitat features which are important to wildlife. That's always good to note in a stewardship plan. The presence of sensitive areas like wetlands or riparian zones, those kinds of areas are always good to have, not only outlined on your map, but some description of them in your plan. And finally, any kind of road construction and, of course, water course crossing plans should be a feature of every stewardship plan, if indeed you plan to construct roads or maybe rebuild an older road, and especially if you want to install any kind of water course crossings. There are fairly stringent regulations in legislation tied to water course crossings. So the more detail, again, that you have, the better. So some of the landowner goals which I've found over the years, speaking with woodland owners, and of course these differ from one landowner to the next. Many landowners, in the first place, are interested in this whole generational succession aspect, where they know they're going to be passing their forest land on to perhaps their heirs, perhaps their son or daughter or someone else. So this whole business of having a goal to provide a healthy woodland to the next generation is a goal that many landowners have. There's also certainly the financial benefit of any timber or non-timber forest products that may be present on the property, and many landowners see their woodland as an investment, and so the financial benefit can't be overlooked. Thirdly, landowners just enjoy owning woodland, and they feel very satisfied and happy to know that they own a piece of woodland, whether it's behind their house or 1,000 miles away in some other part of the country. There's just the satisfaction of ownership that many landowners have. Landowners increasingly are concerned with conservation, not only of resources, but conservation of wildlife species as well. So there are aspects of conservation which many landowners like to have built right into their stewardship plans. And hand in hand with that is habitat stewardship, or the management of wildlife habitat, whether it's maintaining a deer wintering area or maintaining perhaps a wild apple orchard for different species of wildlife. Habitat stewardship is near and dear to the hearts of many landowners. Recreation, of course, as our population becomes more active and becomes, especially during this pandemic, increasingly interested in recreation in the outdoors. Some landowners have taken to walking on their woodlots or cross-country skiing on their properties, or many other forms of recreation, which, trail running, that kind of thing. So to many landowners, recreation is important. And aesthetics. Most landowners want their woodlots to look, either like a natural piece of forest, or some want them to look very managed, very regimented rows of trees. And there's a whole gradient of desires there among landowners who wish to pursue aesthetics on their woodlots. But aesthetics are an important thing to many landowners. And lastly, but not least, and this is certainly not the only list of landowner goals that there could be many more, but many folks enjoy just walking on their woodlots as a spiritual retreat, as a place to go for peace and quiet, a place to reflect. So all these goals, as I say, are goals that I've run across in the past, which landowners have had, and doubtless there are many others. So we come to our polling question number 2. Reflecting on what we've talked about, what are your 2 most important goals for your woodland? What 2 things do you see as being most important? And this is kind of an open-ended question, so we'll allow a little more time for answering this, but certainly tell us what your two two most important goals are for the future on your woodland. This one probably takes a little more thought than just an A, B, or C answer. So while you're doing that, I'll just move on with the presentation. So I mentioned earlier that a map was very important to a stewardship plan, and I've seen many examples, wide-ranging examples of woodland maps over the years. Some are absolute works of art. Some are sort of drawn on the back of a piece of newspaper. Not the most accurate thing in the world, but to some landowners that's adequate. But a map really should give you as much detail as possible within reason for future activities and resources that may be found on your property. So in the first case, a map should contain an accurate, a fairly accurate as you can, location of your property boundaries. In addition to that, stand boundaries as well. As you can see, there are a number of stands on this particular woodlot, and they're all numbered, and each stand would be distinct from the others. There are also some planned roads and some existing roads on the map, and those are important to have accurately drawn, because they indicate not only where the current roads are, but also planned roads for future activities. Any lakes or streams, water courses, they should be indicated on the map, and also any boundaries of operations. If you're undertaking, let's say, a thinning treatment or something like that, the boundaries of that thinning should be indicated on the map. Any time that you're crossing a stream, it has to be done correctly and within the bounds of provincial regulations. So stream crossing locations, if you can accurately locate them on the map, that's very important. Any special management zones, for instance, zones close to streams that are that may be fairly sensitive to rutting or should be protected by a riparian zone, those should be outlined on the map. Wildlife corridors, which certain species of wildlife use to move between one area and another. If you find heavily used trails on your woodland, those likely could be indicated on the map as well. Certainly any stick nests that you find or cavity nests that you find in trees. For instance, raptors like owls, eagles, hawks, those types of birds. It's important to mark those on the map so that any future operations will avoid those areas, especially during sensitive nesting seasons. And also heron, great blue heron nests. If you've ever seen those, they're pretty distinctive, and they look kind of like a chimney on top of a tree. And if you've ever found a colony of heron nests, you'll never forget it. It's a pretty unique experience. So raptor and heron nests should be indicated on the map. I mentioned deer wintering areas earlier, and in this kind of in this climate, deer need shelter in the winter in certain places, good thermal cover. So usually they prefer spruce stands or hemlock stands with good canopy closure, and any areas like that that you find that deer are using could be marked on the map. And I did mention sensitive areas such as wetlands and places where heavy equipment should avoid rutting up the ground. Those areas should be indicated on the map. Any species at risk that you may find on the property, it's always good to note those, and also any areas of interest to other users. If there is a trail, for instance, a cross-country ski trail that goes through your property that others are using on a regular basis, even if it's just a corner of your woodlot, it's good to note that on the map. So boundary lines are important, and they run the gamut of, just an old, sometimes a wire fence running through the woods, or a painted blaze in this case, in this picture, right through to a newly surveyed boundary line with all kinds of bright paint and survey post markers, the whole 9 yards. Boundary lines should always be well maintained and well marked so that everybody knows where they stand and where they're situated on the landscape. So the roads, which you may have in your woodlot, might look like this, or they may be more elaborate or less elaborate. But eventually, to manage a woodlot fairly well, you're going to need some kind of road system. And water courses and ponds and other water bodies such as lakes, those should all be noted on your map. In addition to sensitive areas like this one, which is an old beaver flowage, of course, you can imagine how fragile the soil is in this area. So sites like this should be indicated on the map just so they can be avoided. Special management zones on both sides of any water course, again, should be avoided. And this is just a deer trail going into a deer wintering area. To some people, it's fairly apparent that this is a deer trail. To others, maybe not, but it may show that deer are moving from one stand to another in the wintertime or during the fall season, either to browse or to get shelter. So noting these kinds of things on your woodlot map is important. A really good tool for looking at different wildlife features and habitat features is this field guide to forest biodiversity stewardship, which was produced by the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables just a few years ago, and I'm sure many of you already have a copy of it, but it's an extremely good guide to just the types of features you may find on your woodland. And these might include features such as a hardwood seep. These hardwood seeps may not be immediately noticeable to a lot of people, but there's usually a bit of running water at all times of year in a hardwood seep. And in the springtime, it's often one of the first places to green up in the forest. So hardwood seeps are very important for amphibians, for wildlife that need a water source, and for those species of wildlife that like to browse on green foliage. Hardwood seeps, as you can imagine, are very fragile environments. So it's important to take note of hardwood seeps. Snags and cavity trees, we've seen in other presentations on biodiversity, just the importance of snags for perching areas for different species of birds, and of course cavity trees. If you can get a snag and cavity tree 2 in 1, such as this example here, that's a bonus, because you can see the cavities at the base of the tree, which are large enough certainly for some species of woodpecker. Chickadees will also use small holes, and even some smaller mammals will use small cavities near the base of cavity trees. So snags and cavity trees are very important biodiversity features. Raptor nests, hawks or owls that build stick nests, or in this case, probably bald eagle, or perhaps even a red-tailed hawk, which built this nest. anytime you see a stick nest on your property, you want to make note of it. And I'm sure most of you have heard of vernal pools, which are sort of seasonal bodies of water in the woods. They're dry at some time during some seasons of the year, but at other seasons, such as in the spring and fall, they're bodies of water. And they may not contain much water, but it's absolutely vital for many species of wildlife, including amphibians, and even little shrimp called fairy shrimp that live in these pools during the spring and fall seasons. The thing about vernal pools is they really have no entrance and exit. There's no flowing water moving through them. So vernal pools are kind of a static feature, and but they are very vital to many species of wildlife. So anytime you're around vernal pools, you'll both be delighted with perhaps the number of species of wildlife you might find around them, but also it's great to take good care when working in and around vernal pools. And here's an example of what a vernal pool may look like during midsummer. You know, if you're walking in your woodlot and you come across something like this, you may say, well, this is just a meadow in the middle of the woods. Well, actually, this is going to be full probably in the late fall and in the spring, filled with water. And so it's a very sensitive site, and it pays to use caution around these types of areas, even if they're dry. So something that certainly many of you are aware of during the past number of years is the province's move towards forest ecosystem classification. And this book has been produced by the department, and it contains 3 parts pertinent to Nova Scotia. The first part being vegetation types, second soil types, and third ecosites. So it's quite a large book, quite a thick volume, and many forest professionals take this book with them to the woods because it's as you can imagine, it's hard to memorize the entire thing. But some do a great job of learning the most pertinent parts of this forest ecosystem classification system and applying it just from memory. So even in the woods, these books can be very handy, and by observing the site conditions around you, you can learn to tell what you might guess would be the soil type, and also by looking at the vegetation type. So the site conditions will tell you these things. So by sampling the soil with the soil auger, and by looking at the vegetation, the species around you, and the abundance of it, a lot can be determined about forest ecosites and the ecology of the area. And increasingly, we in forestry use this tool, and it's an excellent tool to use in preparing stewardship plans. And as you can imagine, when you look out over the landscape, this would be a bird's eye view. You see this pattern of stands or pattern of different areas across the landscape. The darker areas might be softwood stands. The lighter patches may be hardwood stands or riparian zones with watercourses. But you can see that across the landscape, there are many different types of forest stands and forest ecosites. So this picture really drives home just how variable it can be across the landscape. And the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables has gone to great lengths to identify not only ecosites, but ecodistricts and other levels of ecosystem and ecology identification across the landscape. So this gives you just a bird's eye view of that. And when we are talking about forest stewardship and forest management, it is good to talk about dominant trees, codominant trees, intermediate trees, and suppressed trees. And different tree species, of course, have different tolerances of shade. So, for instance, a trembling aspen tree, or what some people might call popple, really isn't very shade tolerant. It needs full sunlight to grow. So, it's usually one of the dominant trees in a stand. Whereas a red spruce tree, which can grow happily in the shade for 20 or 30 or more years, might be one of the in the intermediate canopy of the of this depiction here. And then perhaps the dominant or codominant trees may blow down or are harvested. Red spruce can happily grow on that site, even though it's been living in the shade for quite a few years. So each stand on your woodlot should include a description, and within that description should be the forest group, which is determined by using forest ecosystem classification. There are a number of forest groups in the province. For instance, spruce hemlock is a forest group. Intolerant hardwoods is another. So there's a range of forest groups. Dominant tree species and vegetation type are important to have in your stand description, because it can tell you a lot about the type of ecosite that you're on. Soil type, of course, is determined by using a soil auger or by using a soils map, or a combination of both. And you can tell a lot about a site just by determining the soil type. And then the vegetation types and soil types combined will indicate to you what classification of ecosite that you're on. So vegetation type and soil type are important to know. In addition, of course, to biodiversity features. And we will review, or we have reviewed a bunch of those. So to bring it all together in your stewardship plan, you probably want to talk about stand treatment recommendations, any road construction and watercourse crossing recommendations. As many woodland owners know who have achieved forest stewardship certification or other types of certification, certification considerations should also be to be brought to bear for those folks that are interested in forest certification. And that's another entirely different topic, which we really won't go into in this discussion. So it's important also to follow through with your plan. In other words, what you plan should be what you do, and within reason. And once you start carrying out activities, then it's important to start keeping records. And I know many landowners that have management or stewardship plans that were done 20 or more years ago that have just progressively kept good records of what they've done over the years. And it's so much easier to come up with a new stewardship plan once you have all those records in one place. So keeping records, accurate records, is very important. So that brings us to our number 3 polling question. If you have a woodland or stewardship if you have a woodland stewardship or management plan, how old is it? So I see there's 3 choices: 1 to 5 years old, 6 to 10 years old, or 11 to 20 years old. And if it's more than 20 years old, you could possibly also indicate that too. But I'll give you just a minute to, if you do have a plan, to indicate how old your plan might be. So once you have your stewardship plan in place, you may undertake, or a forest professional may recommend different kinds of silviculture prescriptions. On the left is tree planting, and that could be full planting or fill planting. And on the right is crop tree pruning. So from planting to pruning and everything in between, there's a whole range of silviculture prescriptions that could be made for any one of your stands in your stewardship plan. So here's an example of someone carrying out a pre-commercial thinning or an early competition control. Those are two separate treatments, but that's just one example of the type of silviculture work that could be done on an area that is starting to regenerate and has trees, 2 meters tall or in that range for thinning, or maybe for in the case of early competition control, for release from competition. Here's a photo of a hardwood commercial thinning, the results of which are always very nice to view. Hardwood thinnings, I know I'm very fond of them, and they can really yield good crops of timber and high value trees in the future. So commercial thinning is another silviculture prescription that could be undertaken. And in a similar vein, a softwood commercial thinning. In this case, a tamarack stand or eastern larch, which has been thinned. So just some examples of silviculture prescriptions. And in the end, we like to think that good stewardship planning will always, in the long run, lead to good results. And in some cases, folks pursue uneven aged management of stands, such as selection management. And here's a good example of that, where you have a number of different ages of trees, a number of different species. In general, these trees are fairly shade tolerant and they grow well in the shade of others. So this sort of uneven aged management is a long-term goal of some landowners. So I just want to touch briefly on stewardship planning resources for private land, which may be available to you or in your region of the province. Here is just a list, and by no means is it complete. All of these organizations, I know, provide management or stewardship plans for their members, and there are also others. There are also forestry consultants that will do stewardship plans for your woodland, and I think it is a good move to talk to any of these organizations or any others, certainly talking with forest professionals about putting together an effective woodland stewardship plan. So we come to our final polling question, and it has to do with whether you consider your woodland to be a working woodlot with regular silviculture and harvesting activities or not. We know that many landowners don't undertake a lot of regular work on their properties, and by regular I would think that some kind of intervention every 10 or 20 years would be considered regular. But many landowners just enjoy their properties or their woodlots for their own solitude and for their own personal reasons. So I'll just give you a second to answer that one. Simple yes or no. And with that, I'll wrap up this presentation. I'd like to thank you all for participating and for listening to me go on over the better part of the last hour. But this is stewardship planning is something that I'm very passionate about. I think it's an absolutely critical part of woodland management or woodland stewardship. This whole business of putting together a plan and following through with it. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Don Cameron.
Thanks very much, Dave. Wow, that was great. Folks, you just had a Forestry 101 in 40 minutes. They covered a lot of territory, but it was really interesting and very understandable, I think. You use both your terminology, Dave, and your video, your photos really illustrate and are descriptive and help the understanding. So thanks very much for that. It's now Q&A time. We're going to set aside some time for people to ask some questions if they'd like to. So again, simply click on the Q&A tab on the top right side of your screen, and then you can type in your question or comment, any comments or questions that you might have there. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Dave, maybe while we're waiting, it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about that we just found out this past week by our inventory group that found a very old tree down in the western end of the province. You know, all of us in forestry talk about what is an old tree and what's the oldest tree you've found, and hearing other people's find old trees, and kids ask us how old trees can be, and we use those trick questions with them. Well, apparently just recently our inventory group in doing some work down in the western end of the province found a hemlock tree that's 530 years old. Quite a rare thing.
That's really impressive, Don. Yeah, good work. Good work to those folks that were able to find that tree. That's incredibly impressive.
They had to do many increment borings, of course, because there was rot, but they were able to persist in using microscopes and other means. Okay, we have some questions here for you, Dave.
Sure.
Let's go. Is LiDAR imagery available for free? And if so, how does one access it?
Sure. LiDAR imagery is available for free, and um, it is available on a website, and the website doesn't come to me right now, but it is available on a provincial website. And if anyone wants to email me, I could certainly provide them with that the web address.
Great, thanks, Dave. Somebody says, I have not seen much information about using seed, probably seedlings, or well, maybe seed, to increase biodiversity as a silviculture prescription. And they say, is it effective?
That's a good question. I know in years gone by, the department has implemented some seeding experiments, and I don't know that they've been all that successful, mostly due to the fact that broadcast seeding really is a pretty risky venture when it comes to rodents eating your seeds, and there's been a high mortality rate among seedlings that have been, even successfully propagated by seeds. So planting individual seeds throughout your woodland, if they've been properly germinated, I think there might be some better success with that, but I'm not entirely sure how successful that would be. In Nova Scotia, we've got oodles of species of animals that love to browse tree seedlings, and especially young tree seedlings. And that's one of the biggest issues with trying to get hardwood seedlings growing in a forest condition. But seeding it may be something that that could be looked at as a way to help build up more of a genetic base of species that are at risk, or perhaps may need we would like to see more of.
And there are many of us landowners that just keep planting seedlings knowing that some will survive despite the browsing and the frosts and all the various other things. And there's those keeners out there like Mr. Hamilton, Jim Hamilton, that uses acorns and goes around and puts acorns in here, there, and everywhere, and some of them do survive. So there are ways to do that. Okay, another question from Leslie. Is LiDAR available for the whole province?
That's a good question. I know it is available for certain parts of the province, but whether they have entire coverage or not just yet, I'm not sure. It's been a fairly long process to get this LiDAR imagery in place, and I know that for certain areas of the province it is, but certainly if you try and chase it down online, it will indicate to you which areas of the province would be available.
Okay, Dave, you talked about where you can get plans done. This question is in relation to assistance. So I guess this would be, is there assistance, is there financial assistance available to help with the costs of creating a management plan?
Currently, I don't know of any financial assistance available, but there may be some in the pipeline. So I would stay tuned on that one.
Okay. Brenda asks, do many landowners do core sampling of soils to determine the health of the forest floor?
Um, what was the first part of the question again, Don?
Uh, do many landowners do
Oh,
core sampling of soils to
yes.
determine
No,
the health?
no, not many landowners would, but um, many forest professionals would when they're determining soil texture, drainage characteristics, things like that. So a soil auger would be something that a forest professional rather than a a forest landowner would be more apt to use.
Great. Liz was able to determine that the LiDAR is found at a website, geonova.novascotia.ca /news -blog /new -provincial LiDAR available. So if anybody wants to hear that again, they can just go to the recorded version of this and get that if they
Great.
need that.
Thanks, Liz.
Here's an interesting question in relation to the Leahy report. Randy asks, will the Leahy report have any implication for stewardship plans on private woodlots?
To my knowledge, most of uh, um, most of the private land recommendations in the Leahy report are voluntary recommendations. I know Professor Leahy made some very distinct recommendations in regards to Crown land, and I think he did make recommendations on private land, but and some very good ones. But I don't. But I think they're going to be voluntary ones.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're setting an example for Crown land, which will hopefully set a good example for private landowners when they see that it's working, that they support it, that there will be a mechanism that they can follow or emulate.
Sure, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, Lee asks, what would you recommend for financial aid to help in managing forests under a management plan that is still in the works? So I guess that means a
Mm.
management plan that's still current?
A management plan is still current, and the question is about financial aid to
Yeah, what would you
continue
recommend
implementing it.
to help in managing the forest under a management plan? Yeah.
I see. Yes. Well, certainly, if um, the landowner is interested in implementing silviculture activities, there are various ways of getting silviculture assistance in implementing a management plan on the ground. Um, Aside from silviculture, I don't think that there's much available in the way of financial aid, but certainly through any of the registered buyers, the sawmills, or through the Association for Sustainable Forestry, some financial aid is available for um, qualifying silviculture treatments.
Absolutely. And that's very popular source, isn't it?
Certainly it is, yes.
Okay, Alex asks, I have a 9-hectare hardwood stand that was thinned 8 years ago. Now it's been damaged by a sleet storm, not an uncommon scenario. Is there any insurance help? And secondly, should the broken tops be removed or thinned again?
On the insurance part, I'm no insurance expert, so
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of coverage would cover something like that. But certainly, if you want to improve the overall quality of the stand by removing damaged trees, that could be done. And if it is a hardwood stand, the damaged trees, if they're if they may make firewood quality or something even better. So I would say, um, I would say in the long run that yes, it would be good to remove the damaged trees.
After the horrific damage that Hurricane Juan caused, there was no, I don't think, insurance, but there were government programs that were brought forward to assist landowners. But that was a large scale sort of calamity situation. I don't know of anything for smaller scale windstorms and sleet storms.
No, and let's hope we never see another storm on the scale of Juan anytime
Mm.
in the near future. That was, oh
Y-
wow. People
Yeah,
still talk about it. I still
yes.
remember it.
Let's
2003 wasn't that long ago for some of us.
That's right. And let's hope that the climate crisis situation improves so that we don't have the increased storm forecast or intensity of storm forecast that we're hearing about.
Yeah.
Okay, last one, Dave. Is there or when is the best time of year to do a management plan?
Well, certainly if you would like to get sort of average conditions on your woodlot with regards to soil drainage and the ability to spot things like vernal pools and small water courses and seeps. I would say the spring or the fall is likely the best time to. That's when I always enjoyed doing stewardship plans because in the springtime things are just leafing out and there's still plenty of moisture around, so you can tell the type of drainage conditions that are in the stand. And in the fall, well, everybody likes to be in the woods in the fall. And uh, as well, there's a higher moisture or a higher uh, yeah, moisture content in the soil in the fall. So spring or fall, although walking in the woods as the summer is great. And even in the winter on snowshoes, I still enjoy that. And even though if there is a snow cover, you can't see all the ground features, and it's not as easy to readily identify some ground vegetation types. Um, Stewardship plans can really be done any time of year by an experienced person, but I always enjoyed them in the spring or the fall.
Yeah, I guess there are some advantages when you have the leaves off the trees in terms of seeing through and seeing everything. But then again, it's harder to identify all the plants too.
Yes.
Great. Well, Dave, on behalf of all those participating today, thanks very much for your time, your effort, and useful information. And of course, as you know, because of the fact that we're only virtually together today, we're unable to personally present you with a thank you gift on behalf of all those that did benefit from your experience. However, you will soon be receiving a container of a popular non-timber forest product and a favorite sweet treat, maple syrup, from our friend Pat at Rosebriar Farm of Carroll's Corner. So thank you very much for all your good effort, Dave. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks. I know that Pat and Janet O'Toole make a mean maple syrup, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'd like to thank you, Don, for hosting this, and also I'd like to express my thanks to Liz Cogan and Christopher Stratton for helping set this up and for handling all the logistics that are behind this presentation.
Thank you, Dave. There's no question about it. The ladies back there in the truck are the ones that do all the hard work, and we're the lucky ones that are up front here. So thank you to them. Well, folks, that brings to an end today's session. Our next Woodland Conference mini-series webinar session will be Wednesday, November 24th at 7 p.m. The topic will be forest access roads, one that many of you have asked for over time. It'll include everything about woods roads that might interest you. Included will be speakers from the Forest Nova Scotia Roads Program, Nova Scotia Department of Environment and Climate Change regarding watercourse crossings and impacts, and the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, formerly DOT or TIR, depending how far back you go, regarding road construction. The full conference webinar mini-series schedule can be found on the NSWoods website. Again, we plan to hold additional webinar sessions in future months, leading up to hopefully 3 regional live and in-person conferences in the spring. Again, we'd like to thank our presenter, Dave, for making this event meaningful to all those who tuned in tonight and those that will view it at a future time. I'd like to bring your attention to the home study modules that the department has produced for your enjoyment and value. Dave referred to many of those topics in his presentation, and we have both hard copy and virtual copies of those. So you can just go to our website, contact myself or or my good friend Simon Mutabazi in Halifax office, and we will get those home study modules to you, or you can go online and access them. Also, for those landowners, especially the new ones that want to access other woodland owners to learn, there's a woodland owner network set up that basically has an open door to woodlots and woodlot owners that are interested in helping other landowners. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of that. Woya, Dave mentioned the Woodland Owner of the Year award. This year we had a great time at Luther and Joyce Sears Woodlot in Moose River in celebrating them winning the Central Region Woodland Owner of the Year award. And I would encourage you to send in any nominees that you might have that you think of landowners that might deserve such an honor. There are many of them out there, but we don't know about them, so please let us know. Another nomination topic is Boston Tree. You may have heard that Orangedale is providing the Boston Tree this year. We're looking for more trees for the future. So if you know of a big spruce or fir tree in the 40+ foot category that's got the beautiful shape and taper and density, please let us know about it and we'll check it out. Okay, finally, please provide your feedback in the exit survey. This will help us plan for the future conference events. To do this, before you close down your browser, click on Leave Event to get to the exit survey, which takes 1 to 2 minutes to complete. Your information will be kept private and not used for any promotional or commercial purposes, we promise. And if for some reason you're not able to complete the exit survey, simply go to the nswoods.ca website and email the request to have the exit survey emailed to you, which we'll do, and you can respond. Well, that's it for now, everyone. We hope that this was a worthwhile use of your time and that you learned a lot. We look forward to our next session and hope to connect with you then. Thanks, and take good care of each other. Bye for now.